Good hello to everyone, and welcome to our second encounter linked to this beautiful proposal of our professors and teachers, the master's level course, The Culture of Unity. So it's the beginning of the Pedagogy of Communion for a Culture of Peace of our Sophia University. Today, uh, I will accompany you and we will think how an ecology of the mind. So before beginning with all the questions and all of our contributions of our guests, I'll tell you simply that I am Valeria and I'm a student here at the Sophia University Institute of Political Science. I will accompany you today in this encounter with them. And before anything else, for languages, therefore, they have the translation. You find on your right the button for interpretation. For the technical questions we ask you, if you, while our guests speak, if you have some questions, write it in the chat, question and answer area, because the other chat will be utilized simply for technical issues. We're sorry for these technical issues that we have to collaborate with one another in the situation of the pandemic. Now, I don't want to speak a long time, so right away I'll invite our Professor Piero Coda, who was the first president of our institute. Currently, he's a coordinator of the uh, Human Sciences, Philosophy, and Theology, and also the director of the School for Postdoctorate. Welcome, Professor. With you. Thank you, Valeria. Thanks all of you who are present. I just give a very cordial greeting and I'll say something, a very brief thought. A very cordial greeting, first of all, to our two speakers today, Professor Michele De Bene and Professor Antonella De Ponte, who have been among the pioneers for more than 10 years by now at Sophia of that itinerary, interdisciplinary itinerary in human sciences, education, psychology, which currently are converging in a promising way in a new direction of study. Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Antonella, for your commitment in these 10 years that have gone by, for your perseverance, for having believed in this journey, and thanks for the new thrust that you're giving your contribution today. And then a greeting just as cordial, and if possible, even more, to this exceptional participant we have with us, Professor Alberto Zucconi, who will give us the gift once more of his word and his friendship. His look, glance, outlook, which is wealthy, rich with expertise and recognized experience on an international level, for us is very precious and certainly a pure guide. His word doesn't fall on emptiness, but we undoubtedly value and use, draw from it. And this also, why do I say this? Because of the experience over time, over these years, thanks to the mediation of knowledge of him through Professor Michele Gazzani, his outlook is not just objective and impartial, you could say from outside. It's all of this. And for us, this is important. But at the same time, it's an outlook which is empathetic and synergetic from within. And therefore, we feel deeply understood, almost with mercy looked upon in our limitations. But you understand we're deeply in the thrust that animates us, and the desire that we need to put into practice. Thank you that you're with us. And once more, as happened in the past, always feel at home because Sophia is your home. A very brief thought. In these days, the last days, I was very positively struck by an interview that was released by the new minister in Italy for public and education, Patrizio Bianchi, of the Draghi government regime, saying like this with a slogan, we have to create a new school. Together we can make it. It's a good wish to develop a new school. Important desire in a seeing a difficult scenario in this post-pandemic, a new school, a commitment which it seems to me is very well connected with the title of the webinar that you wanted to give in this meeting. To think, how is it going? Think, why? Because school, we know, from the Greek schole, brings us back to that room for freedom that is taken, drawing from the busyness and the commitments in life, so that with friendship together, it's possible to discern what is really important, what's decisive for our existence, and to set things up as a consequence in our life. And thinking is an intensive verb that we draws from the Latin pendere, which means to ponder, to weigh with precision. And that's why to run and to think go well together. There can't be a commitment in friendship and in freedom because this is a school, room for freedom and friendship. If not as an exercise in pondering with attention the meaning and value of what we are called to live together. A new school is born from putting together in our room for freedom and this commitment to ponder new thought, thinking about thinking. Today, Dr. Moran says it's the most important capital we have in our hands because human capital. And Sophia has as a commitment precisely this, to give life to a school of this kind together with many other experiments that we see enact today, which are more than necessary. I went to pick up things in this outlook, and I invite you to take a look at it. No, the zero issue of our review, Sophia, which presents the program of the new institute, in which there are, among other things, two important contributions. One by Chiara Lubick, who founded our institution, in which it said the goal, the objective of this school, and she calls it this way, school. She knew that it was a university, but she called it school in this sense, this high sense of schole of the Greeks, the school of the Latins, is to teach you wisdom, to taste and ponder the sense of life, meaning of life. And subsequently, after her, Father Foresi, Pasquale Foresi, in a very beautiful contribution entitled Life, helps us to understand a new school of thought. Precisely his wish is that a new school of thought be born, which he describes in these terms. We have to begin to bring about in authentic communion, friendship of life, this new school where formation is human, full, total. And it involves all of our being and it determines our life, our existence forever. It's only from life that joy, peace come, a type of knowledge that books alone cannot give. This the person understands the one who, not the one who detaches himself from being, not based only on notions of culture or abstract ideas, but the one who in reality makes an effort to live. And as a consequence, thinks in this logic, in this form. So it seems to me that we're on a good path. All best wishes, all the best for your work. There'll be a chance to touch base again to evaluate the results and medium and long term that we want to try to bring about to give life to this new school. Thank you in particular to our friend Zocconi. And I said before I have to leave because I'm involved in a webinar at the same time with Latin America. All the best for your work. Thank you again. Thank you, Piero. Professor Coda, even the beautiful atmosphere that we always have in this university, it, it's it comes to us more, we call him Piero familiarly. So let's begin right away with our reading. We'll enter more into the content. So right away, I welcome our first guest, who's a Professor Michele Di Bene, who is an education and a psychotherapist. He's a student of De Bono in the field of strategic thought. He collaborates as a European coordinator in the international project of research. But above all, for us, he's a teacher at our university. To you, the word. Thank you. A greeting to everyone in this second webinar, where it's further presentation of our master's course in pedagogy of communion for a culture of peace. So, as Professor Piero Coda was saying, here there are two very important words, unity and peace. So they're not empty words, not abstract words, but they're something lived. And as the foundress, Chiara Lubick, bore witness, and I still remember, I remember a personal recollection of her with what ardor, with what competence above all, pedagogical competence. She spoke about education in Washington in 2000 when she was given an honorary doctorate precisely in education. And whoever knew her and whoever was near her knows what was her greatest dream, a united world. And this is also the outlook of the University of Sofia. Here, as was also anticipated by Professor Koda, it's not something, just a specialized form of thought, but a precise response to questions of meaning. We could say, without emphasis, here philosophy dwells in its incessant quest for meaning. But certainly, diversity, it runs through all of its points, knowledge, science, this human, very human frame, thirsty for knowledge, but then wisdom, this unsuppressible need for truth, harmony. But let me say, it seems to me that there's also a further particular element that distinguishes our university. It accompanies the invocation, comes to our mind, our heart, the invocation of the spirit of wisdom. Yes, because God is all of this. And in our university, I think that if you try to connect together, all together in one, because if God is all of this, if it's wisdom and He's desire and knowledge and light, and therefore I'm honored to be able to belong to this institution. And now, this year in particular, for the first time, I was entrusted with a new teaching, which is precisely planning and evaluation of formative processes. It's a course which we could, in a wide sense, locate in vaster horizons, indicated by the famous Agenda 2030 of UNESCO. This agenda, which you undoubtedly know, regards the development of an education of quality, but equality as equitable and inclusive of learning for everyone. Therefore, it encompasses a vast commitment with as a long view. And it seems I can draw from this document not so much the worries about economic investment, financial considerations. It seems to me that what comes out in an urgent way before anything else, the need for efforts in the field of formation, and not only for generic formation, but above all, focused on the world of adults, the varied world of adults. And the university, in different contexts, specific context, is part of the formation of adults deep down. So we're talking more and more about lifelong learning. In other words, this learning is through the span of life. And I think that if this is the task of the entire school, it gives birth to the idea to desire to learn, which is a distinctive sign of all through life. Even more reason for this university has this task of creating a promise for a quality and a happiness, we could say, in over the span of life, all through the entire life. So the role of formation, it seems to me, that there are all the premises today on a worldwide level, and a sign that we can draw is a central and determining point of progress. But that requires, therefore, a different outlook with which we can look at knowing. Picking up a bit, a great philosopher, Hannah Arendt, in her famous book, Life of the Mind, she affirms that thought approaches death when it loses a relationship with the world, with human activity, with life. But at the same time, this thinking becomes blind when, at a certain point, it distances itself, certainly from life, but also when life, activity, is distanced from thinking. So this interdependence between thought and action, between thought and life. So in the idea of the course, even if this is purely pertinent on a psychomethodological didactic, I tried to bear in mind the interweaving of many levels. There are kind of classical questions. What is the human learning? Why formation? Why knowledge? And what place does this knowledge of oneself occupy in this knowing? What is the role of experience, the role of theories, and so on? So as you understand, there are many implications on the anthropological, personal, and social level to these questions. So the course, as also in its constitutive form, unfolds in specific steps of learning, need formative needs for diagnosis, formulation of objectives in teaching, their implementation, evaluation. I tried to taking into account Sophia's nature, which is a practical theory. There's a lot of commitment, a lot of impact in our university. It has with life and the students, rather life itself of the students, from which a certain knowledge of life is brought that leads to knowledge, science. So it's interdisciplinary, but it brings a vitality. So the method that we try to bring out, an analysis of cases in which it leads to the research effort of responding to precisely on the integrative background of models, interpretive models, precisely in this brief space, beyond an analytical exposition of the course, it seems important for me to focus attention on a view wider, wide. And this perspective is to offer a Unitarian course on learning. There's a fermentation of learning that could would give immediate satisfaction, but over time it's paid for in terms of quality, not only quality in the sense of knowledge, specialized knowledge, but also in the quality of life. Above all, in the quality of from the standpoint of the discipline itself, which would be disconnected from other fields of knowledge. This is why the course goes through the framework of a strategic model that's entire and integral. It's part and altogether. In other words, it's based on the assumption of the mind, like an ecological mind in this sense. Therefore, not just as a simple sum of separate functions, fragments, but like an organizer, that's complex organizer of relationships throughout. And from here, you see the importance of stimulating a constant process that what I would call construction of knowledge or deconstruction of knowledge and reconstruction of knowledge itself. In what sense? That is of information, and therefore, in view of a united Unitarian view. In other words, everything knowledge in a certain field. So it's not the fruit of a generic superficial approximation, but it's a constant, I could say also, struggle that's called the fatigue of the concept. But it's a process of interaction, which on one hand is a starting point and a goal. So from the undifferentiated framework, also according to the Gestalt psychology, it's something which is not yet clear. There's not differentiated, but from here you start from the parts and the whole, and we could call it a, a journey of validation. The more ideas are more defined, and it opens up new restructuring. So at times, just the knowledge is just information alone. It's confused with knowledge. This is typical of our culture. These fragments thrown here and there, also on the level of media, we think that we know because we have some information. However, we know well from our experience, but also from the tragedy, that information given badly can create on a level, not just a personal level, but on a worldwide level. We know very well that this knowledge alone is not enough. We need a working mind that's capable of thinking and which asks much more than simple notions. So it's also the outlook with which we could say, always on the basis of the agenda of 2030 of UNESCO, that brings about changes a bit as Einstein affirmed. And it's something he said for an effect, it's like a parachute works only if it opens up. He's saying the mind is like that. And so it calls us in first person to a challenge, an important challenge that I think which should be borne above all by our old maps. And our old maps are, are a great consolation because they accompany us, they give us certainty. But if we don't know how to unlearn in a certain way, learning from the new points of view, different points of view, probably our map will become sterile. And therefore, leading us to new knowledge is something that unifies constantly, but it gives meaning to it in a process that's articulated and complex. However, I want to emphasize it's not a simple process, strategic process of thinking, of acting, as it is a bit like with the great thread of strategic psychology. It seems to me that the important thing is that in this process, articulated and thinking, before anything else, what matters is being. In other words, people who are in dialogue, present, active. Real thinking, according to the outlook of our university, which is a technological, ecological outlook, is thinking the more we're able to go along constructive courses in relationship with oneself, with others. So there's a dialogical approach to the mind. And this approach, you understand very well what I said before about construction, deconstruction, reconstruction. In this constant ongoing process, a central place is taken by error. For me, error, but also other students say this before me, error was seen like the moving center of thinking itself. We could call it the epistemological culmination. Here probably lies the greatest challenge of formation, like a freedom, liberation, not only from ignorance of things, but from the ignorance of not knowing. In other words, in that form of ignorance of the second order, as Socrates called it, I don't know that I don't know. So it's a form of knowing if we were really able to make it our own. Then what we reach would go beyond the ignorance of the second order, in, along notwithstanding good intentions, even strategic capacity to put things together. It doesn't just act simple adherence to an abstract ideal, but in my opinion, it nourishes another characteristic, that is the decision to leave passivity. It requires a humble mind, but a human mind which is open, capable, however, and this seems important to me, to glimpse beyond, and therefore beyond the limitation of conflict that ideas could have, or prejudices. In this sense, picking up also the title of our course, it's a mind, it's a peace, a mind of unity, of peace, a challenge that calls and takes the entire being, the entire person, And here I really have a great joy that there's Professor Zucconi, who really, together with Rogers, his great teacher, made a fundamental point on a person for formation. And therefore, it seems to me that we have in front of us a challenge to give life, to give oxygen to a beautiful mind. I would call it this way, a beautiful mind, because it frees. It's not a prisoner of preconceived structures. And therefore, it's capable of opening up. Therefore, it doesn't hold anything for itself because it is able to take ownership of everything as a gift, not just the curiosity of knowing, but an openness as a gift of knowing. And therefore, it seems to me that this is also the integrating background of the planning and evaluation of formative process. On this background, that we try to move and to be a tool for change, as Hannah Arendt affirmed many times, for love of the world. And this is how the greatest desire of Chiara Lubick, when she affirmed, my craziest dream is when I will come to you, my God, she was saying, and bring you the world in my arms. And from the point of view of my discipline, I would say the greatest dream is to bring to you, my God, to bring you humanity and being which is more formed because it's more human. Thank you. Thank you, Professor DeBene, for this very deep contribution. There are already many questions to ask you, but we'll have a chance later. So now, to not take time from our guests, I will give the microphone to Professor Antonella de Ponte, who is a family consultant. She's a researcher in experimental psychology. And above all, I say above all, she's also my professor. So for me, it's also a joy to have her here. She's a teacher at our Institute of Psychology of the Person and Psychology of Relationship. Welcome, Professor. The word. Thank you. Well, hello to everyone. Thank you, Valeria. Thanks to everyone. Above all, thank you for those who are translating, which is very precious. So I'll try to give you a hand as much as I can. I would like to start from my experience. Teaching psychology of the person, for me, was a great occasion for reflection and re-elaboration of years of study and teaching that I had earlier in my experience, before experience of Sophia. When I got to Sophia 10 years ago by now, it became very clear to me, precisely from the encounter with the students, that I couldn't base myself on the experience that I brought with me. It was a time to invent something new, something adapted to the very particular reality that was I was encountering, that was being born. Passionate students coming from different cultures with different formative backgrounds. Therefore, a challenge already on this level, but further on, the program of study and life that characterizes Sophia. Altogether, it represented a challenging, com- complex reality made of many aspects and many nuances. And all of this required and requires a new effort, an effort to building together the itinerary with respect, of course, for the roles, but at the same time, in a reciprocal, unprecedented openness. Psychology of the person is an introductory course, which has the goal, however, which is pretty ambitious, and that's seeking a common outlook on a model of person that comes out from the comparison with the principal orientations in psychology. Therefore, behavioralism, psychoanalysis, cognitional study, humanist psychology. The question that we seek answers to is, what are the visions with regard to human being and its functioning that every school has with itself, that every author brings with himself or herself? And if it's possible to find some points of agreement, shared anthropology, at least in part, from which we can start out to find the person. This is the question which we put ourselves on the journey at the beginning of every journey, every year. The journey, therefore, we try to do from the concept of the individual, understood as an isolated unity without a history, subject to action of variables and conditioning. From this concept to the point of arriving at the concept of person, this journey passes necessarily from the relationship with the other, from a mere agent of influence of the behavior, becomes instead a co-protagonist. Co-protagonist in what? In building a shared reality, which emerges in history, and yet it's always new. Garrigan was saying in 1999, we carry the traces of history with us. Everything that we are and do is saturated with traces of current and nearby relationships, but also far away in time and in space. At the same time, each moment is new, and we have the possibility to encounter the other in an always new, renewed way. The other as other from me, but also as another me. In other words, the knowledge of oneself is the fruit of the relationship with the world, with the others, with the complex situations that unfold, that life puts in front of me, and which are the territory for the action of my own possibilities, my potentiality, of my resources. To use a metaphor, these articulations are the stage on which the choreography unfolds of our existence. And since there are uh, these dances, there are solos, but also steps with two steps with three. Cognitive psychology put in light mental processes that organize our knowledge, whether it's the knowledge of ourselves or the world around us or knowledge of the others. Being aware means acquiring levels of freedom in behavior and thought, even if all of this runs the risk of being confined in a limited space of an aseptic individualism. It can be found in certain aspects, in certain discussions, and the level of the science of psychology. All of this until we encounter relational dimension of the human being, the need for recognition and membership that characterizes a human being, his knowledge, and also his need for transcendence. Garrigan, still Garrigan, it says another thing you understood. He's an author that I like a lot, but he's not the only one. He says some beautiful things. In particular, freedom contains an emptiness that only the relationship can fill. Being relational that he talks about leads precisely to overcoming this dichotomy between freedom and determinism, which is one of the topics of discussion forever in culture, considering instead the world and persons in terms of relational convergence. It's a concept which I like a lot because it indicates precisely the possibility, constantly renewed, of creating something because of the encounter with the other. To pass from the I to the we, it's essential. The enchantment is necessary. In other words, an additional value, something added to the connection, something that makes it transcendent. The encounter, in fact, creates a third reality, which does not belong to the persons in interaction, but at the same time expresses them. And it expresses them also beyond what could be an initial understanding of each of the persons that put themselves in relationship. This third reality is a place for reciprocity in potential. It's a place for a construction building of oneself, but also of the other, of reality, of the dream. At this point, after the course of psychology, the person, the course of psychology relationship begins, but this is another issue that we'll leave for another time. I'll stop here. And I thank you. Thank you, Professor. As always, it's a pleasure to listen to you. And now we have reached our last only in order of the contributions, our last guest, Professor Alberto Zucconi. Welcome. Welcome, Professor Zucconi. There would be a lot to say about you, but I'll try to be brief to leave more room for your contribution. So, just in a summary form, it's simply he's a researcher who is widely recognized in the field of psychotherapy. He's a student of Carl Rogers, and with him, you founded the Institute of Approach based on the person, collaborates with projects of the World Health Organization, and he's a consultant on the prestigious World Academy of Health and Science. And ultimately, and above all, he's a great friend of our institution. So we thank you. We strongly thank you for being here with us. I give the microphone to you. Thank you very much. I too hope that you will call me Alberto because it's true that I feel at home at Sophia, and it's all due to you. I appreciate this university very much all over the world. And it happens to me, I rarely happens to me that I feel at home, having been in many universities in the world. But I remember very good Piero Coda, and then Michele Di Bene, and Professor. Until today, I hadn't had to know Antonella de Ponte. Since time is short, I will try to say a few things, but I won't let myself be taken by the pleasure of be also with my feet on the ground and to remember that there are translators who give the possibility to communicate to people who speak many different languages. So I too want to thank the translators, but also my friend Michele, because more than a colleague, I consider him a friend. I thank him for this invitation. So I'll come to the essence, would explain why do I feel at home. Michele had mentioned it, also Piero as well, whose thought I know. I've read some of his writings. This university is very ambitious, very much, because my summary of what I've listened to today and other times as well is that rightly it emphasizes that having notions, even a lot of them, should not be confused with knowing knowledge. But then, even more significant, it seems to me that this is why it's ambitious, is that together, school to build together processes that I would say are towards wisdom, human wisdom. It seems to me also worth noting that here constantly two instruments are played, and they are both in harmony and they're in synergy, one with the other. On one hand, many of you bear witness in a sensitive, understandable way. You testify your own faith in a religion. On the other hand, and this is the value that makes it even more pleasing in my eyes, you profess respect, sacred respect, I would say, for the person, and you're open both in the among the teachers up to people, because who is really religious and belongs to a real religion cannot has to see another person, perhaps with another religion or atheist or in doubt, and see that it's good news, because what's sufficient is that it is a person. In this, you articulate, you express, Professor DeBaney was saying, emphasizing also the importance of the entire span of formation of learning, which rightly so, you see it divided not only in knowledge, too often, universities in education, in my opinion, are part of the problem and not the solution, because they give tools which are concentrated only or almost exclusively on knowing knowledge. Knowledge is useless if then we don't also know how to apply it effectively, which is the second important part, being able to do. But knowing how to do can be very dangerous, and it can go in the opposed opposite senses, opposed to good intentions. History is full of it. Why? Because a third leg is also needed for this. That is knowing how to be. And there it seems to me, Mikhail Banger is also a psychotherapist, and therefore it's very clear. And also very clear, if I comment on what I've understood of Professor De Ponte, it has as an objective another ambitious goal. Since without knowing how to be, there's no possibility for to be in synergy effectively, knowing and knowing how to do the objective. I would say the ethical objective, political objective, sociological, anthropological goal are I'm totally in agreement parenthetically. And also the World Academy of Sciences. The Institute collaborate fully with the UN for a sustainable future. And I believe that this is important in your university to be aware that not only is there a need to be ambitious and to aim at co-creation, co-production of wisdom, human wisdom, but that every wise person cannot be interested merely in his or her own profession, or merely even acquiring skills and knowledge, interdisciplinary skills. We need to also be intersectoral, and therefore, what better objective altogether than elaborating in a working together in a coherent and consistent way, building a universe, a planet, a sustainable future. I believe in this very much, and I'm happy to hear of it. Rather, I'm proud of you, who are brothers and sisters in this journey, that this is really what will determine the outcome of our planet. We are part of the solution, or are we still part of the problem? And that's why the sustainability, rightly so, and here is also the reference to Andrew and Gaji, Adult Education. Malcolm Knowles wrote a book that brings ahead Roger's idea in this sense, that certainly they have something to do with what we are saying, because this this wisdom, or also let's say a deep sense of transcendence, as a professor De Ponte was mentioning, in my opinion, they're a natural faculty of a person who's not encrusted by neurosis. In other words, we are objectively dust from the stars, everything, the entire planet. And therefore, the most normal thing in this world is to feel it, that we are at home in the universe. This I see beautiful with the image. But finding a home in Sophia University to be at the home of the universe. I'm not joking. Every healthy person must feel at home in the universe because he or she is. Otherwise, it would be like sleeping under the bridge uh, and not in a beautiful apartment that our universe is. So bringing ahead what I would share some writing if you enter into in this consortium, international consortium. I teach sustainable relationship. What do I mean? I'm also a psychologist and psychotherapist. Not only, what I mean is important to understand that health cannot be individual. It is the health of a community, of a society, but also to be able to make peace. Talking about peace, it's very important. But if I'm not able to make peace with the different parts of myself, how can I really be capable of creating peace among others? Every time that I remember that part of me that I'm denying, that I'm struggling with. And then what's important is to stop being at war with ourselves, with others, but also all the forms of life on the globe, because we are fighting every day a struggle to destroy our globe, our planet. It's absolute craziness. And so, absolutely, and I'll go. I want to comment. Obviously, would be obviously many other things to say and what the significance of your talks, but also what Professor De Ponte was saying. Parenthetically, quoting an important, little known in Italy, Kenneth Bergen, who is one of my colleagues, and together with his wife, who for 20 years have emphasized the importance, as Rogers did in the 40s, that the reality is socially built, that we professionals, even more in mental health, we need to understand that our knowing, our being able to do, if they're not married with the awareness, they can be dangerous, and because we have an enormous power, rather too much. And so there's a need to redimension, to balance out the extreme power of the professional and to be the meaningful agent and build together meaning, co-build narratives. And instead of diagnosis and care, this demonstrates better ways. That, for example, of promoting a change through empathy and looking at people with deep respect and seeing their dignity. Because if we see it, who is pathological? The professional or the user? The professor was saying an important thing, that all deconstruction is important to see I'm going to conclude on schedule. Don't worry. It has to see the points of contact. Undoubtedly, I'm in agreement with Professor De Ponte. I particularly, in this subject matter, I would say that before seeing the contact point, it's also to see the great differences because they exist, and it would be, uh, I'll explain better, it could be a rupture. Every vision of human nature, it's a university that takes care of sociology, history of science, sociology of science, psychology, psychotherapy, health, health, as we say in Italian, public health. Sorry, at times English enters into my mind. Well, from human nature, what comes out? Well, the construction and social construction, which defines me as a Jew, Catholic, a woman, man, homosexual, religious, atheist. For some, in some societies, it's a condemnation to death. Everything that is definition of human nature is extremely political. Above all, if the one who proposes it is in authority, every professional is in authority with respect to others who don't have this social role. Above all, these times, we need to reflect for a moment on the enormous impact and the effect that it has by proposing it in the 1800s, not because of the one who proposed it, but because of blindness and ignorance, not aware that proposing that the vision of human nature is mostly done by people, women. They're affected by an incurable syndrome, which is the sharing of good. We affirm, falsely, mistakenly affirm, even though we have proof on the level of research until the 50s, until 1973, in the diagnostic manual, psychiatric manual of psychoanalysis, every citizen was defined as homosexual, lesbian, a citizen who was affected by psychopathology. And they knew that it was false. There are all of the minutes of the meetings of the directive of the American Psychiatric Association. Not only worse, they made a census among psychiatrists in the States because it was too political to abolish it, even if they knew it was fake news. They approved, and a great majority approved it. But the American psychologists, that I also am one of them, because I'd emigrated there. I was teaching in the States. They waited an entire year. So the vision that we have of human nature is very important. It's important to understand that when we define human nature, we accomplish a political act because from human nature, what comes out always, what's generated, the psychopathological theories. In other words, since this is human nature, how do the problems develop? And from the vision, psychopathological visions, what comes out is a theory of therapy. So, not reviewing today in a critical way the visions that we have of human nature and of change, I would say is really being part of the problem and not the solution. And then it's important, the research tells us, and here I'm going to conclude because my time is up, that there are common denominators. We know Rogers was the first to do research and make these possible. It's all therapists that have a deep respect for the person, in which they see without judging, even though he's very different from you, from their, without seeing it like a fly on the window, but understanding it empathetically, approaching, in short, his phenomenology is that he relates in an authentic way, aside from what their approach to their membership is. They're more effective. Besides, all psychotherapies have in common, obviously, hope, whether the situation, whatever situation is, something can be done. But we have a lot still to elaborate. For years, we have taught at the university that schizophrenia is a syndrome, uh, prognosis, which is difficult. But that's not the truth. The truth is that if you see it as a chronic illness, you make self-fulfilling prophecies. All of the movement of recovery demonstrate absolutely it was fake news. So the university has responsibilities, also moral and scientific, which is very serious. It has done bad to people, teaching what was false. It's fresh water from the stream to reach places too little, as Sophia University, which has professors like you. If I had 60 years younger, I would have wanted to go there asking for a scholarship. All the best, and thank you for your work. Thank you, Professor Alberto. Thank you, because it was extremely clear and deep, and you're an extremely competent person, but you were able to put yourself in a position of relationship, horizontal relationship, and this is mm, very thoughtful of you. I don't want to steal time because there are a lot of questions that have already come. So before passing the word to begin with the first question, I remind you, still sorry about the technical thing. We need to do it. I remind you that the questions, if you can, send them to the chat, the question and answer section of the chat. Whereas forever is followed by YouTube, there's a chat next to the video. Now, our director is sending the various questions. And in the meantime, right away, our office directing us passed a question on to me for Professor Rick DeBenny. So we begin with this, and then we'll go ahead. I'll read it to you as it came to me. Teachers of the secondary school, uh, second level, in the city of Brescia, and he asks if Professor DeBenny could explain how in Sophia is taught this dialogical openness of the mind in the quest scientific research and also the so-called transdisciplinary dimension. This teacher asks you still, Professor DeBaney, affirming that he participated with a great satisfaction in the course's we care education. Therefore, yes, what could be the role of Sophia in building uh, a journey of lifelong learning for teachers and educators in general? I apologize. Before giving you the word, giving you the microphone, forgot to tell you that whoever wants to say something, there's a button on the right at the bottom that tells you raising your hand. So whoever wants to participate in a more direct way and not just writing, and you utilize this tool. Sorry, I forgot. Professor DeBanny, I leave you, give you the word. Certainly, it's a very complex question, at least three within it. So I'll try to give some little comment on it of an answer. It seems to me teach at high school level, this question is also in view of what could be hypothetical for a university course, but above all, in view of what will be life, the capacity of thinking, to be able to enter into the world of these students entrusted to you. The first spontaneous response that comes is the Gospel of John today that you read. And when you refer to the priest Caiaphas, it seems he prophesied that Jesus would have died not for his nation alone, but to gather together the children of God who are dispersed all over. It seems to me that also the title that we've given to this conversation is methodological question, is a bit the thread running through it makes us discuss what it means to try to think for our young people. It seems to me that there are two characteristics that should be important both in high school level, but also in the elementary schools and the middle level schools. To think of extraordinary, precisely because they're in contact on teaching on formation in the schools, the strategies of thinking. In other words, how to utilize thought in a way that's productive, constructive. All of these projects, unfortunately, are not put in practice so much in schools, but substantially they can be brought back to two great factors, let's say. Capacity to welcome, take in reality in its, on one hand, fragmentation. In other words, to understand all of the parts that are articulated and bring them back, however, to a culture which is more unitarian. So, as Professor Zucconi was saying, we don't crush the differences, knowledge, nor the issue of the interdisciplinary dimension, but you bring out give value. At the same time, you call them back to building a wide zone of knowledge. Therefore, we could say that in all knowledge, they're attracted to the one, to the one. And in this sense, the mind, the ecological mind, is a mind that's prophetic. It means that it's not only able to distinguish, it's able to synthesize summaries, it's able to repropose new syntheses and go back to analysis, but it's prophetic because in some way it's able to be projected beyond that. What comes to mind is the great lesson that we need to learn from history, the recent past, the economic crisis, of financial crisis of 2008, ISIS, the Twin Towers, the COVID today. If we look at these tragedies in themselves, each one of them disconnected from the other, disconnected from the context, this is where the mind begins to work. It's a connective mind, ecological mind. So if we look at these tragedies, this detached from the context, the repercussions they had on a worldwide level, the lesson that we need to have learned will certainly not be useful for progress. Instead, in the framework of interdependence of the system, even the formative processes in the wide sense, broad sense, we always have to take into consideration this background. In other words, that we are in a certain sense destined, called to unity, unity of being with, but also unity of thinking, which doesn't mean uniformity. And here, quote Professor Ciccone said, the differences need to be opportunity, let's say given value, because in each difference there is a part of truth. Therefore, if we don't do this work out of love, of being guided in this prophecy of unity, if we don't do it out of love, at least we should do it out of need. Think of the schizophrenic lesson that states are giving in these days regarding the vaccines and the fake news to discredit a competitor. It's myopic. Why is it myopic? Because it's fragmentary. The fragmentation, let's say, is contrary to inter and transdisciplinary dimensions. In other words, they're not prophetic precisely because they're myopic and fragmentary. So we're convinced, now I conclude, The quest for reciprocal respect and help in the end will be the good destiny for thinking. And so working for a mind that's open. In this sense, the formation, therefore, has its own prophetical role. And that can include the whole thing, because the questions that you're asking are many. At Sophia, for 4 years, what's beginning is a great effort at formation for teachers, which has a great title, We Care Education. We ask for education. You understand that all of this has to do with we, with us. Therefore, thought, as Professor Ponte was saying before, rightly so, it has something to do with relationships. So a thought which is without a relational capacity, not only with others, let's say it's like social psychology, but also in the field of formation of concepts, how thought is formed, how we deconstruct thinking, how we reconstruct it, being careful, attentive to the differences, attentive to the others is the great challenge. And for school, since the question came from a professor of a high school, it's fundamentally important, precisely to build not just a healthy mind, an open mind, but a good, a beautiful mind, because it has this in its heart, this dream, this prophecy of a world of peace. So we have a question for Professor DePaul. They ask, school, it teaches to think, but not to be in relationship. So what's important is this. Why is it not taught to relate? Thank you. But really, I don't know if I completely agree with this affirmation, because surely school every once in a while tends to focus its attention on the objectives and things to be learned, not the objectives of learning. And therefore, it's a bit of notionism, if you want. However, the current situation is teaching us to us in a very strong way. School is a place for relationships. School is one of the places where, par excellence, I encounter the other, and I have to measure myself against the other. This, I believe, is fundamentally important. Probably here again, Michele could say more than me for all of his experience in the scholastic field, the academic. I worked little, but what I can say is that undoubtedly it's possible to make more explicit this role of education also to relationship, which the school could have. This undoubtedly, and here would be a lot of work to be done. I believe honestly that it starts from each one of us, this work. I think that each of us has in our experience, which I see of students in the first years of school on, the teachers that we remember in a good positive sense or negative sense. It's not that we remember them for particular reasons, if not precisely because of the relationship that was possible or it wasn't possible to establish with them, for the recognition that they gave us in as much as person. This, I think, on this level, we can, all of us can do something. And then for all of the rest, instead, on a level of politics, instruction, education, there's work to be done, and we're waiting for people of good faith, goodwill. Another question for Professor Zucconi. I'll read. I'm a teacher at the high middle level school and a journalist. I'm wondering, can you tell us your opinion, the role of communication in promoting the health of our society? I would see even more the school in every single in school. In reality, I had answered the various questions that were addressed to me, but I'm happy to answer um, uh, directly. As I had already written, it depends. Communication in itself is not good or not good. I would say that communication, if we mean it as a construction and exchange of meaning, significance, is an important bridge among different persons, and it builds and it cements individual and social health. When I say health, I'm not just referring to if I have a cold or COVID, but I mean bio, psychic, social, spiritual terms. The communication, besides everything else, was said that at times the word kills more than the sword. In front of us, we every day, above all, the shameful examples of many of those who are elected to represent interests of citizens in the Italian parliament, for example, how bad will, to be honest, bad faith is so paranoia and false ideas. In short, it can be very, very, very destructive. I would like to also say that in history, also always in the school and education, education was used intentionally as a weapon for brainwashing. Eh, Whoever of a certain age, they know in Italy that psychology, for example, was prohibited by the fascist regime. Why? Because psychology, Professor De Ponte knows very well, offers a vision of human nature. And this was seen as competition with the regime, which wanted a monopoly in teaching in the elementary schools and the middle level schools. What was the vision of human nature that built and cemented the fascist dictatorship? And it was called, the subject matter was called fascist mysticism. It was nothing other than all Marxist dictators and dictatorships and Leninist dictatorships, which precisely had one psychology alone, which was accepted in the Russian universities, that of Pavlov. Look, in short, communication was always used in an effective way and ineffective way. One last example, England was printing books, textbooks for children of going to school in the colonies. And they intentionally falsified geopolitical history. What at that time there wasn't communication because under the English dominion there was also Italy and France, Spain and Portugal and Germany. In short, the whole world. And that's why a child in India was saying, "Well, we are a colony, English colony, but practically all the rest of the world has this normal form." This is what I think about communication. Thank you, Professor Alberto, even if you'd already written answers, but I think it's always useful to share the knowledge with everyone. Thank you. Now, since unfortunately the time is running out, I would give the word to my colleague who will address some questions all at once. I'm sorry, and thank you for your patience. So a question for Professor De Ponte. Could it invade your experience to say what processes can facilitate understanding how essential relationships are in front of self-sufficiency, which is knowledge, being able to do things. knowing how to do things, what they could generate. And always for you, knowing oneself in the encounter with the other is a very rich perspective, which enchants me and challenges me. If I understood well, it's one of the steps to reach the point of being we. Could you say something more in this regard? Pushes me to pose this question is that I observe in this journey from I to we many times, the journey ends in looking for oneself in the other. How can I go beyond it? What do the thinkers say about this in the psychology of the person? Could you indicate important points along the journey? No? I give the word to Leandro, who will read a question from YouTube channel. We have a question from Immacolata Martinelli for Professor Zucconi. You say, we are the ones with our choice, part of the solution or part of the problem. How do you think that we could make a contribution so that on a ministerial level, it's possible to implement a permanent formation of teachers that has all three of the objectives, knowing how to do, and knowing how to be. Thank you, Professor. How does it work? I'm wondering, does one answer? Because Professor didn't respond to that question, so I'm not sure what I should do. I would suggest simply to begin with Professor De Ponte, and then, and, okay, very good. I'll begin, but also do quickly. In short, I found a way of connecting both questions. And then, of course, it's available in a subsequent comment to go more in depth because they're very articulated, complex questions. So passing from the I to we, it's true that at times there's a quest for the ego, which goes through we. And how can we help one another to understand that relationships are essential? Very simply, what connects both of these situations is the level of well-being of persons. A person is well in the time in which they are in an authentic relationship of positive reciprocity. Therefore, that is the first indicator that will be useful to understand if we are going along the path that really leads us to full fulfillment of our being, or if we are instead are caught up in some place in the same way, it's what will push the other, who until now may have been clothed in a consideration of priority of oneself, seeing instead we are well. It will pose the question. A desire will develop to experience a relationship that he saw in the group of at work or friends, where this level of relationship, I don't say always reached, but at least pursued. I would stop here to give the word to Professor Zucconi. Therefore, what can we do? First of all, in a democratic society, a lot with respect to a society that's not democratic. And therefore, to ask why, because someone has the right to ask, and to ask in all the places that are offered to transmute. And then I would say teachers have a representation, a union representation with in every respect. And so to ask when there's negotiating. And then I would like to say that my institution has taught, paid by the ministry, more than 60,000 teachers in Italy. Certainly, it's a small number, or else I remember when Professor Michele Di Bene, we had begun from Sofia. Sofia had asked, its institution we had begun a pilot, 3 cities, that before COVID, and then it hit, they have a program in 10 cities during the entire year. And in other countries, I would say that I too worked and work in many different countries. I believe that it's possible to obtain something if we are convinced that we have a right to it, and if we are aware of our personal power, inasmuch we are citizens of a democratic state, far from perfection. And so ask, ask, ask. And then how can we make pressure? You write letters to the newspapers. Yes, do it. But be aware one's own political representative, the requests that you want to emphasize and their importance. And then in this also, I'm sorry to see how much human capital and energy, because teachers are victims of this state of things. They're the first victims. They don't have formation, effective formation in universities and in the courses. The teachers are taught to still be teachers. It's part of the problem. We have to help the teachers to become effective. How? In the only way possible, to become facilitators of learning, to build together with their students, also having the bulletin of Bologna process, which by now for more than 25 years, Europe is going ahead on the thing of knowledge society of Europe to stay in step with the change of times. It says, we still are not there. We need that we really put into practice what we have always said. Let's promote a school that's focused on students, not on the professors. Let's promote an involvement, uh, involving the students in the development of the curricula and also in the evaluation of the results. And there are eight books to consult. Freedom to Learn by Carl Rogers, and another book by Rogers, which have been translated into Italian by Astrolab. So I would also say, I would also emphasizing with greater strength that all of this is a waste of human resources, but also of costs, because the approach centered on the student is more effective for everyone. They learn more, they are more motivated to learning, but they also learn critical thought and to be good citizens. So it's crazy, really, to continue with the distinction that remains. But what is the real problem? It is that to become a facilitator of learning, it's necessary to become more humble. It's necessary to renounce part of the power. And so here, what's needed is a change, not only of one's own head, but one's own heart. Thank you, Professor Alberto. I give the word as a last comment. I give word to a person in our audience, Andreas Noy. So 2 questions. I like very much this ecological mind, because we need to become more and more in integral persons with a relationship. And it seems to me that today, in the inundation of fake news and relativism of every knowledge, we really need to have a courage for this process that Professor Devani spoke about of construction, of deconstruction, reconstruction, having a critical thought. What can we do? What ways should we take? And then perhaps another question: would people today be able to give our knowledge as a gift to humanity? How to humanize our process of learning, to be gift, not just as something that gives qualification. Thank you. Well, the people in front of us, I hope I can give some little input, but it seems to me that professor who asked the question comes from a country of Southeast Europe, I think, from Slovenia, I think that I know also. Therefore, I would only answer with a little experience of research that I did still in earlier years during the wars in the former Yugoslavia, in the Balkan area. So before finding solutions of ex-Yugoslavia, research that was done at the University of Bratislava, at University at Verona, in collaboration with the University of Thessalonica, and there was research on all the textbooks of schools of Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Macedonia, all of these countries, they belong to the Federation of the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia. Well, no, I don't have the data right here at hand. Let's say it's an impressive number of fake news dictated against a controlled state. In other words, there wasn't a textbook, I don't know, in Serbia that spoke about Croatia. But Croatia, there wasn't a textbook that spoke positively about Slovenia and so on. But it was an impressive thing. I'm talking about 3-4 years before the books at that time, and we went before to understand what happened. It was a political war. No, it was a war of fake news above all. And here, there's another concept that I would like to emphasize. The reinforcement, in other words, a fake news is not just a mistaken news, but then this is not reinforced many times. This news, in some way, it's one of many. If, however, I continue to reinforce it, I keep repeating it, it's a bit what's done in political information and the deformation of some personality, or in the composition of a gracious draft of a delinquent in it, why we make them a saint. So there are two mechanisms. Let's say one is the rule that's transgressed of falsity. That is, there's no basis to those things. The second is to reinforce this, to bring to the objective. So in some way, as Professor Zucconi was saying, I speak of all psychology of authoritarian countries, the simplest thing, that of reinforcing. Speak mildly, speak badly, speak badly, is something remains. But I would like to reverse turn over since the professor was talking about the concept of gift, if we start from the point of view of an ecological mind, an ecological mind cannot not look for something that's good, because the moment which it opens up, the moment which I get informed, I take different points of view. Only if I'm a criminal can I fake that I didn't see. So who is the mind that deforms reality? The mind that has already decided to utilize information for evil. But with the same mechanism, here we're talking about mental strategies with which we build a good mafioso, because a good mafioso gets a Nobel Prize for the strategic capacity of his thought to have seen different points of view, the objectives, the consequences, other points of view, alternative to that, just to reach to his own solution is his objective. But if this same mechanism of thought is applied to a good objective, then the mind, with positive reinforcement to reach a good. And therefore, fake news, in my opinion, have two, two allies, which are the desire for evil, will for evil, whereas the will for good is a will which hasn't yet the tools. But if it's inside of itself a quest for meaning as a gift of life to the other, well, in that moment there, it will find all the tools to become working, reaching in view of that goal, objective, to find all the strategies, all the possibilities that can be given to me to reach the point of creating a culture of peace, a culture of unity, of thought. This seems to me that is a bit picking up again what I quoted before. When thought approaches death, inherent, it loses contact with the world, with the concrete world. But if we open our mind and we see the world in its global dimension, a global dimension is also made of saints, not just murderers. It's made of heroes and not of cowards. It's made of, therefore, a world, and here reinforced, being able to focus and give value and its equivalent for the person to its effort every day that he does to become good, to become a good mind, to reach a democratic person, a person who loves. This is a function of the mind. Therefore, the mind is much more beautiful in as much as it's able to think, to utilize strategies that are correct, but it's much more it's more beautiful in as much as it's good, because thought is the exodus. It's not a capacity to hold on, but it's a capacity to let go, to open up, and therefore this exit has no other goal. This outcome is nothing else but no other goal other than what Chiara says, to bring the world together. We could say to bring the world to its most human essence. And here, in my opinion, is a great challenge to thinking. As a great philosopher, our friend said, thinking out of love for the world. Thank you. Thank you to all three of our guests. I thank you because you are all three extremely clear, and you can see that there are people who are extremely prepared, and you put in play with the great availability and patience. Also, because here in the hall, there are also the students. So we all thank you extremely for your availability. And I thank obviously the translators, all those directing, all those who've helped us. And I'll give you an appointment for the May 8th, because unfortunately, because of problems connected with the pandemic, in April, we will not have our encounter. It will simply be postponed to a later date. We'll see everyone on May 8th at 6:30. For possible questions or other things, I remind you of our email, which is compactedu at symbol sophiauniversity.org. Thank you. Happy Easter, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ciccone and Antonella, and all of those who've listened. Thank you.